Alrighty, guys. Hope you guys are having a fantastic holiday season. We're coming up here on New Year's. I think tonight is actually New Year's Eve. But we're filming a fun video today, a little bit different than any of my other videos. We're going to be filming a kind of how-to general fishing video. So for you guys that are maybe beginners or maybe curious about learning some new stuff, this is the video for you. Full disclaimer, I'm not a professional fisherman. I wouldn't even say I'm that great of a fisherman. I'm just some dumb kid who's been fishing for a long time, and I really enjoy it, and I felt like I could share some information with you guys, especially if you're a beginner. So if you guys are a beginner and you guys are looking to learn all these different things, we're going to be talking about knots, different lures, line, different types of rods, reels. We're going to be talking about different rigs, all kinds of stuff, other general stuff about fishing that could help you guys as beginners. So basically, I have this video set up where if you look down, if you go over if you like move your mouse or whatever, you can see it pops up and you can see there's little chapters on the timeline of this video. Each one will be labeled with what I'm talking about during that time. So let's say you want to learn about bait casting reels or whatever, you guys can go over to that section and watch that anytime. So we're going to go ahead and get right into it here. We're going to start with line. As a beginner, I always just fished whatever my dad, gave me, and usually he was right. So at the time, I always had the right line. But for you guys that maybe don't have that or have anyone else that's knowledgeable, we're going to go over the three main types of line. So the first one we're going to talk about is braid. This is some spider wire, which is just the brand. This is 20-pound braid. It's kind of a green color. And braid is a no stretch line. Basically what happens is if you were to pull on this, you couldn't stretch it at all. There's no stretch. It's basically like a small rope. I guess rope has stretch. I don't know. It's basically small wire, but I don't even know what it's made of, but usually it's like an 8-strand braid, and braid is really good for topwater frogs. Braid is also really good for Texas rigs, which is a rig we're going to talk about later if you don't know what that is, like a weedless rig. And I fish braid 90% of the time, especially here in Florida. Braid is really strong. It's really hard to cut, or really hard to break, I should say. It's actually really easy to cut. So if you're fishing in saltwater, for example, or if you're fishing for fish that have really toothy mouths, like a walleye or a lot of saltwater fish have toothy mouths, you'd want to fish with something called fluorocarbon. This is fluorocarbon. It's clear, so fluorocarbon is really good for really clear water because the fish have a hard time seeing it, where the braid, they can see it a lot better. So if you're fishing really tough conditions and really clear water, usually fluorocarbon is the way to go. Fluorocarbon also has just a little bit of stretch, so not tons of stretch, but just a little bit of stretch, a lot more than the braid does. Fluorocarbon is really good, in my opinion, for moving baits. So when I say a moving bait, I usually mean something like this. This is a lipless crankbait. It's got trebles, as you can see. A lot of times the braid will get all wrapped up in these trebles, and that's just really annoying. Also, another example of a moving bait would be a small little jerkbait like this. There's all kinds of other moving baits that I'm sure you guys will experience as your fishing time goes on, but that's what fluorocarbon is good for. The last type of lure or line that I never fish, but there are a lot of people maybe up north that fish it or use it as backing for a reel. This is monofilament. This is like 8-pound mono. Mono has a lot of stretch. You can really stretch some monofilament. So if you're fishing maybe, I don't even know. I don't use monofilament, so I'm really not sure the exact applications, but there's a lot of people that it's pretty popular, or it was pretty popular. Braid and fluorocarbon are kind of the leading lines these days, but mono is still pretty good. I believe fluorocarbon, another example which I didn't say, fluorocarbon sinks. So for example, if you're using a jerkbait that you want to stay down, you want to use fluorocarbon because it's going to sink with the bait. Or if you're using braid, it's going to float on the surface, which is why it's good for topwater lures. So now that we're done with line, we're going to go straight into doing some knots. As I was a kid, all my friends and my family could tell you I was the worst at tying knots, and now I think I'm pretty decent. But for the most part, I was always really bad. I pretty much only use 2 or 3 different knots. just full disclaimer, these are just the knots that I like to use. There's like 50 other knots. Everyone's going to has their own favorite that they think is the best. These ones are pretty simple. They'll make sure that what you're doing, you're not going to break off, whatever. And we're just going to go ahead and talk about them. So we're going to grab some braid here. I got braid on this rod. So we're going to start off with a really good braid knot. So if you're doing braid straight to a hook, well, rod's falling. You're going to want to use what I call a uni knot. So if you're not familiar with a uni knot, I'm going to show you guys exactly how to tie it. So we're going to go ahead and we'll just take our little lipless crank here. As you can see, I broke it off. There's still some line on there, but what you're going to do is you're going to put the line through the little hole there. You're going to get a little bit, kind of like that much. It doesn't need a lot. I'm going to put my hand here and let the lure dangle off the right side of my hand. Pull the line till I have about that much left. I'm going to wrap it around my first 3 fingers. Alright, so now we wrapped it on the first 3 fingers. Feel free to pause this and watch this again. Now wrap it around your first 3 fingers. You have some extra hanging off. Now what you have is these 2 lines here on the inside of your hand. So take these in 1 finger like this. You have your remaining line. Go in through the middle of those 2 and just wrap it around. There's different ways to tie this exact knot. Both my brother and my dad tie it differently. This is just the way I tie it, and it all ends up being the same. I would wrap 6 to 9 times. 9 is probably overkill. 7 is the magic number. Go ahead and take your fingers out after you've wrapped it 7 times and just slowly start to cinch it down. As you can see, it's all coming together. And boom, there it is. And then go ahead and pull your main line, not your tag line, and it slides up to the lure. And there you go. Beautiful little uni knot. And go ahead and get your knife or your pliers, whatever you use. We'll talk about knives and pliers towards the end. There'll be a chapter on that. Cut your tag line off, and there you go. 1 lipless crankbait tied with a uni knot. So uni knots are a pretty universal knot. I do only use uni knots for braid though, because I have a knot for fluorocarbon or monofilament that I like better. So now that we've done the braid knot, we're going to move on to some fluorocarbon here. And we're going to tie what I call a fisherman's knot. There's other names for it. I don't really know what it's called. This is like the world's simplest knot. Alright, so get the end of your line. Go ahead and get your crankbait here. And here's what we're going to do. We're going to use this line right here. We're going to go through the hole just like we did with the other one. Get about the same amount of line. And here's what we're going to do. We're going to spin this lure like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. Get off my hand. 5, 6. 6 or 7 times will suffice. Now what you'll see is there is a hole, or a loop I should say. We've made a loop close to the eye. You want to take your other line, your rest of your tag line I should say. You want to stick it through the loop. Once you've stuck it through the loop, what you see is you made another bigger loop. Stick it back through your big loop, which is the most difficult part if you're using heavier line. Stick it back through the big loop, cinch it down, grab your tag line, get it tight. Sometimes you need to get it wet in order to cinch it down, and boom, there it is. That is what I call a fisherman's knot, and this knot is only a mono and fluorocarbon knot. Okay, so full disclaimer, do not use this knot on braid. Braid can get kind of slippery, and it will pull through this knot. Another interesting thing here is when you're using fluorocarbon or monofilament, because it has that stretch, you don't want to cut your tag line super short. So leave a little bit. Where braid, because it has no stretch, you can cut it really short. With fluorocarbon, leave a little bit so that way it doesn't pull through. Alright, so there we go. That is what I call a fisherman's knot. Go ahead and cut our baits off. We're going to cut all this line off. It's getting in the way of our demonstration here. And we are good. Alright, so we're going to talk about one more knot. Now, this knot is the most complicated knot and only used if you're doing line-to-line knots. So if you want to splice some more braid onto a rod, or a reel, I should say, you would use this knot. If you're saltwater fishing or you're fishing for toothy fish, but you have braid as your main line and you want to put a fluorocarbon leader on, leader is the end part of your line. You can add a leader if the water conditions are very clear or if you're fishing with toothy fish. I usually use fluorocarbon leader. For saltwater fishing, I live in Florida, so we do a lot of saltwater fishing. I usually use 30-pound fluorocarbon leader. And we're going to go ahead and get tying. Where's my line here? Whoa. There we go. Go ahead and get tying a double uni knot is what this line-to-line knot is called. So pay attention. This one's a little bit harder. So get your fluorocarbon here. Got your main line braid here. Stick your hand underneath. So now you have one going that way, one going that way. Start with whichever. You're just like you did the uni knot. Pull your main line out, wrap 3 fingers, and like I said, you have 2 lines here in your palm. One of them is going to be the fluorocarbon, one of them is your main line. You're going to go ahead and wrap it 6 or 7 times like you did. Pull your finger in, wrap. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You're going to go ahead and cinch it down. Boom. Okay? There's 1 uni knot. So this is called a double uni knot because you're making 2 knots line to line. So now that you have a double uni knot, or a single uni knot, go ahead and flip everything over. Now you have your fluorocarbon, not your main line, going this way. And you're going to wrap it around 3 fingers and do the exact same thing. Go ahead and just 5 or 6 times. Get it wrapped and cinch down like that. Now grab your main line, your braid in this case, and your tag line. What you're going to do is you're just going to cinch them together. Watch. Those 2 knots coming together. Boom. Now they're 1. Alright. Now we have a single knot here. You're going to cut your tag lines off. Snip, snip. Leave a little bit more on the fluorocarbon side, like I said before. And that's it. Double uni knot, and that is the preferred knot, I think, for most people. There's a couple other knots, but I think for the most part, people will use line-to-line double uni knot. For the most part, I should say. All right, so that's all we have for lines. Next, we're going to talk about rigs and hooks. So if you hear someone say a Texas rig or a Ned rig, or use a wide gap hook or something like that, we're going to kind of go into that. We're going to start off by a Texas rig, and I just have a pack of worms here. Here's the things you're going to need to tie on a Texas rig. Got a pack of worms. You can either use, in my opinion, a wide gap shank hook like this, or an EWG hook, extra wide gap is what it's called. Or, see if I even have any in here. Here's a rusty one. An offset shank worm hook, which is very similar. It just doesn't have that big belly in the hook. We'll talk about the differences between those in a minute. You're going to take your worm, you're going to take your fluke, or you're going to take your swim bait. Doesn't really matter, creature bait, craw, whatever you want to use, you can put on a Texas rig, soft plastic wise. I like weightless Texas. Well, that is half a worm I just got out of that bag. What the heck? Did I get small worms? Huh. I got the small worms. That's fine. So here's what you're going to do. You got your extra wide gap hook here. Got your worm. You're going to come in from the top. I'll put your hook in. You're going to go down the length of the straight shank. So the part with the barb is straight for so long and then it starts to curve. Go up to the length or till that starts to curve. Then poke it out. Boom. See how that poked out? Now bring your line, bring your worm all the way up the hook. It's going to be a little rotating there up by the thing. It'll look like something like this. You got the worm, you got your hook. Now the key is to put the hook in the right spot through the belly. So I like to do it, or someone taught me this years ago, is have your hook sitting there, put your finger at the widest part of the hook right there, and that's where it needs to go in. So you're going to go ahead and poke your hook straight through. So now you have it look like this. You have the top part up here by the eye, you have the hook going through your worm, and now for the fun part, or the most important part, if you're fishing anything with grass or you're worried about getting snags, here's the most important part. You want to fish this weedless. So what that means is you want to take this, you want to pull forward on the bait, push the hook, and let go. So what that's done is that's giving you a nice little skin hook. I can run my finger right here and feel no barb, but if a bass comes along chomping, bites right there, boom, pops out, set the hook. Now you have that fish pinned and your bait moves out of the way. So you can also do this with this hook. The only difference between this hook and this hook is that this hook has this wide belly. So if you're using something like a swim bait, for example, which has a much thicker profile than this worm, you rig it up the same way. But for there to be room when the fish bites, see how far this worm can go down? On that straight shank hook, it can't. So when you're using a bigger profile bait, a wide gap hook is usually better. I like using 3 to 4/0 hooks. If you're using like a really massive worm, you can use a 5/0 hook. If you're using really small stuff, use a 2/0 hook. Kind of just basis on what you like to use. So that is a Texas rig, or if someone says weedless rig, that's usually what they're talking about. Next rig we're going to talk about is a Ned rig, which I rarely fish down here, but I know it's really popular in a lot of places. So here we have what's called a Ned head. So it's basically just a J-looking hook with this weighted thing on the bottom. There's a bunch of different Ned heads out there. Doesn't really matter, what brand you get or anything like that. So basically a Ned head, how it works, we're just going to grab this same worm that we used. Usually there's things called Ned rig worms. They're shorter and stouter. My favorite thing to do is take a Senko and bite it in half, or take a worm and bite it in half. So we're going to start this just the same as the Texas rig. You're going to go in the same way, up through the top. But instead of coming right out, what you're going to do is you're going to push this all the way through till about something like that. Maybe even a little farther. It's a pretty long shank. And then you're going to pop it out, and it looks something like this. Now, it may look dumb, but now you push everything forward up like that. So now everything's pushed forward all the way up to the head, and you have the hook exposed, which is how you fish a Ned rig. Alright, that's a Ned rig. Super, super simple. Super easy. This one actually has a hook guard on it so your worm doesn't fling off or whatever. I like Ned rigs for fishing up north, and I also like Ned rigs for fishing really finessey waters when it's hard to get bites and they're looking down at the bottom. A Ned rig can really get them. Alright, next thing we're going to talk about wire baits. So here we have a spinner bait. We have a jig and a chatterbait. The only wire bait I don't have today is a buzz bait, but I don't think a lot of people really use buzz baits. They can be good, but I don't really use buzz baits, so I don't have any. We're going to go ahead and we'll demonstrate with this jig. So basically, you could just fish this by itself, but there's not really going to be any profile to it. It's just going to be this small little jig-looking thing going through the water. So some trailers you can use for jigs. A trailer is what you put on the back on the hook. I like swim baits. Some people like sideways flukes where the paddle swims the other way. There's a couple other things you can use, but for the most part, I use a swim bait like this. So this is not super technical, but it's also, you don't want to mess it up. So basically it swims like this with the hook pointed up. You have your swim bait. Going to look something like that. So you got to start upside down. Going to put it in. So you just start it just like you did anything else. And just like with the Ned rig, you're just going to keep pushing it through without making it come out. And then about a third of the way down the bait, You're going to pop it out. You're going to push it forward all the way to the jig. And that's it right there. All right, well, we had to change spots there. There was a very nice family that showed up to that little park behind us, and their kids were playing. I didn't want to record them the whole time, so move spots, and we're going to go right into where we left off. We're going to talk about rods and reels. We're going to first start with, personally, my favorite, which most bass anglers would disagree, the spinning rod and reel. I'm going to talk about just kind of different aspects of a spinning rod and reel versus a bait casting rod and reel, which is going to be the next chapter here. And I'm going to talk about what baits I like to throw on it and what my general go-to rod and reel setup is. All right, we're going to go ahead and start with this rod here. This is a 7-foot medium heavy. It doesn't say medium heavy, it just gives a line weight, but it's a medium heavy, which is pretty much your go-to rod. Like, if you're a beginner and you're not sure what rod to get, you don't want to spend a lot of money, and you're just looking for one rod, that's all you can really afford, I would get a 7-foot medium heavy fast action rod. So 7 foot, so obviously the length. Medium heavy is the amount of power the rod has. So a medium, it goes ultralight, light, medium, medium heavy, heavy, and there's even some rods that are heavier than heavy. Medium heavy is the perfect in-between rod. You can kind of throw just about any bait and it will work. And that's the way to go. So that's why I got this rod. It's a 7 foot. It's a perfect length. Anywhere from 7 to 7.3 is really good. This is a Daiwa Elixir rod, Daiwa Elixir reel. It's a pretty nice reel. It's only like $100. So for a beginner that's looking to get into maybe a little bit nicer of a rod or a reel, and they don't want to spend, like $250 on a Stratic, like, I get that. So this rod, this reel, I keep saying rod, I would really recommend this reel for any beginners. There's some other reels like I believe it's the Shimano Sahara. I think they sell it at Walmart still, and I think it's like $60. And that's honestly a perfect starter reel with a 7-foot medium heavy. I would also suggest the Shimano Nasky, which I think they still make. That's also a really great reel for about that $100 range. Spinning rods typically are used for more finessey situations. So when I say finessey, I mean lighter baits, more technical fishing. You're not power fishing with a big heavy swim bait or something like that. You can really fish anything on it if you get the right rod, which is why I'm telling you, get the medium heavy. That way you can fish a little bit of everything and you can explore what you like to do. So this is a spinning rod. Obviously you can see the spinning rod, you reel, and that's what it is. Now we're going to go straight into bait casting rods. Go ahead and set this down. This is a bait caster. So as you can see here, looks a little bit different. See, you got this curl here where your hand sits when you're fishing. However, you fish it. Keep hitting these things. Hold it like that, something like that. This is a right-handed bait caster. You also have a left-handed bait caster where the reeling hand is over here. You reel with your left hand. I prefer the left-handed bait caster even though I'm a right-handed person. All spinning reels usually come with like the left-handed retrieve, which is typical for a spinning reel. But on a spinning reel, you can put it to the other side, or for the most part. I have never owned a spinning reel where you can't do that. You cannot do that with a bait caster. So if you're going to buy a bait caster, maybe try your buddies out or something and feel which side you like, or see which side you like that's more comfortable. This is a pretty inexpensive rod from Daiwa, and it is also a 7-foot medium heavy. So same as that rod in terms of power, fast action, stuff like that. Like I said, go-to rod for just about anything. And then I would suggest getting a 100 size spool bait caster, or even a 150 is okay. But for a beginner, you don't need like a 200 size or anything like that. And this actually is my first ever bait caster that I started with. This is a Daiwa Black Max. I think it's like $49 at Walmart. So if you guys are looking to like get in cheap and get in and just learn, because the problem with the bait casters, sometimes you do bird's nest. So when you cast it, the line overwraps itself and sometimes can tie in some pretty gnarly knots. You got to cut it all out. It's really frustrating. So if you're looking to practice and you're looking to get into using a bait caster versus a spinning reel, which is easier, I would suggest getting a Black Max. That way, if you totally bomb it out and you hate it, you didn't spend $200 on a Corrado. You know, you got a Black Max, and it actually, this reel still works perfectly. I've had this reel for 2 years. Alrighty, we're back. Sorry about that. Anyway, like I said, this is a great starter reel. I would suggest starting with braid on a bait caster. This is 20-pound braid. I would not suggest putting fluorocarbon immediately on a bait caster. It is a lot easier to bird's nest. So start with braid. And one thing I didn't mention about the spinning rod is I would get a 2500 size spinning rod. This is a 2500 size spinning rod. It's kind of that perfect in between where you're not going to get spooled by a 4-pounder, but it can also handle some of those bigger fish, and it is also perfect for the smaller fish. It's not too cumbersome. All right, so now we've gone over rods and reels. Our last chapter is going to be extras and essentials. We'll start off with some sunglasses here. These are made by Electric, which is a pretty reputable brand. They're also fairly pricey, so if you're looking to get in maybe a little bit cheaper, just go down to your local Bass Pro, go down to Walmart, really go anywhere. There's going to be some polarized sunglasses. The key is to get polarized lenses. Do not get, if you're looking to really get into fishing, do not get lenses that aren't polarized, or you're not going to be able to see as well into the water. These polarized lenses, not sure how the technology works, but I do know that it cuts a lot of the refraction out of the water, and you're able to see a lot better. You can sight fish with polarized sunglasses. Without them, you cannot. So that's essential. Another essential is a good pocket knife. In general, in life, you should have a good pocket knife. But any brand works. Just go really anywhere and get yourself, a pretty decent pocket knife. I wouldn't skimp out on a pocket knife because eventually, when that thing gets dull and crusty, you have to buy another one. It's going to suck. Also, don't lose your pocket knife because I lose a lot of pocket knives. Next essential, pliers. Super, super important. These are a pair of Guggen Squad pliers, which I actually like a lot. It's got a split ring thing on it. It's got grippers. It also has some things for wire stripping and crimping, and then obviously cutters on the back. These are really good for getting fish, or getting a hook that's hard to get with your hands, or dealing with a catfish so you don't want to get barbed or whatever. I would suggest getting a nice pair of pliers. I would spend as much on pliers and knives as I would spend on a rod, if I'm being honest with you, if I'm just starting out. Those are just as important. But other than that, I think that about covers it. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video, and hopefully you learned something. Like I said, I'm not a professional, and if you don't like what I said, don't take my advice. I'm saying that's what works for me, not saying that that's the best thing that's ever existed in the fishing world. But I would suggest to at least try a few of those things and see if you can catch some fish. And I hope you guys have a great time on your fishing journeys. And if you enjoyed and liked this video, subscribe. We're almost 200 subscribers, and I will catch you guys on the next episode.